Hello everyone. Welcome to the Missoula Art Museum. We are going to do a little bit of conversation in this exhibition by the artist Laura Barrett called State of Grace, which is in the Silver Gallery and the Shot Gallery at MAM. So I'm just giving you a little bit of a view of what you're seeing in the gallery. It's a beautiful show. You're going to be hearing from two members of MAM staff, which I'll try to show you. This is Sierra Height.
Hello.
And she's our MAM education assistant. And my name is Jenny Bevill. I don't know if you can see me. And I'm MAM's educator and outreach specialist. So we would love for you to join us. We've been in this exhibition for a couple of days now, just loving this artwork. It's got a lot of variety and a lot of really amazing things to uncover. So we wanted to bring you to this piece first and just share a little bit of close looking with you. Some of the things that we've been noticing as we've been looking at this. Then we'll look at a couple of other pieces and maybe go downstairs and make a connection with a different exhibition.
So this piece jumped out to me because I think on first glance it's maybe a little bit quieter in style and in color palette from some of the other pieces in the exhibition. It has a little bit more of a cooler tone and doesn't use quite so many vibrant colors and images as her other works. But I think once you get a little bit closer, you can really see a connection to the rest of the pieces in the exhibition. And then as Jenny and I started to look, we really began to notice a lot about this piece that we felt spoke kind of more deeply about Laura's work as a whole. I know the very first thing that drew me in is this little piece of tape or paper where she's written "Stay Out." And to me, it almost looks like a signpost or kind of like a stake in the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And that really drew me in, which is sort of funny considering what the words say, but it just like attracted me.
You were attracted to the sign that
Yeah.
said "Stay Out." I had the same feeling. I immediately saw it as more like a window shape. And this curtain on the side sort of blowing was the first thing that drew me in. And then I immediately sort of saw it as like going in and in and in. And I kind of recognized that image in the middle as a Van Gogh painting. And then I checked out the title and I realized that the title was "The Door to the Asylum" in Arles, which is where Van Gogh was in the asylum.
Yeah, and I think Jenny and I both just kept coming back to this image of the mind's eye and as the window into someone's interior experience. And for me, that's really heightened by, I think if you move the camera back and forth, you can see there's like a luminescence to the way that she treated all of these different surfaces. So even though there are multiple layers collaged on top of each other, they all have this really shimmery, almost hardened texture to them that to me feels really dreamy and cerebral. There's something quiet about it that I associate with like a moment of reflection or just interior calm. And I think that image of like the blowing window is just really apt. It feels like a moment of just time away from everyone else.
Yeah, and there's a couple of other little elements. The first thing that we also talked about when we looked at it was the moth. The sort of moth that's been collaged in, and also this kind of big blue, heavy stone, cloud, rock, we're not sure what. Laura Barrett was a collage artist, so a lot of the bits and pieces repeat in the different works. And Sierra, you thought it might be a piece of a cyanotype in terms of the color.
I thought that this blue might be a leftover cyanotype. There are a few other pieces in the gallery that have this similar tone that to me looks like it came from a cyanotype. And one thing when you go through and look at all of the pieces in the exhibition, you'll see a lot of materials like maybe the cyanotype, pieces of paper, things that we associate with art making. But then something that she would do that I think was like really charming and had this nice kind of like humor and almost sense of attitude to her practice is that she would take like these moths or this netting, or even this might be a piece of old duct tape. I think materials that we wouldn't necessarily associate with art making, and they would have their place within the collage and within the image, just like everything else. And I really get this like feeling of willingness to just take and grab from whatever detritus or ephemera kind of falls into your lap and figure out a place for it.
I love that. And it's the casual element of the collage too. I don't know if you want to pick up the edge and show folks at home the way this is hung on the wall, and the way she intended it to be hung is kind of like a scroll, or what it made me think of was like laundry on a line, just in this informal way, not framed, just almost ephemeral in its entirety.
And she also has the title written on the side of the painting, which again, I think there's like something informal about it. It almost feels like a note that you would write on the bottom of your grocery list or something.
Exactly.
It's not even fully visible, but it's there.
Okay, so here we are in front of another work by Laura Barrett, and this is a similar piece. It's a little bit bigger, and Sierra's going to show us again how the piece is displayed sort of over this metal bar as a scroll or a piece of fabric. And we see the same kind of looking inward with the frame inside the frame inside the frame, and the same kind of studio ephemera detritus that she's using, similar silver, almost pearlescent.
I think another element that comes through more in this piece than in the last one, but that we can also find in some of her other work, is to me the pattern of these flowers, again, looks very domestic. It almost looks like something that you would pull off of a tablecloth or a quilt. So now it feels like she's also grabbing materials from her own home or from her own surroundings, like from her house, and repurposing them for her art.
And that's interesting because she was a mother of 5. She had an active artistic practice her whole life. And yet, as a mother, and also just referencing women's work traditionally, using scraps of fabric to make things, it fits into that historical context.
Right, and we know that she was also a really ardent supporter of other women artists, and ran a gallery where she very purposefully wanted to support the work of other women, and was a staunch feminist. And I think when you look at these fabrics or some of these images, there's just this, I think, kind of quiet assertion of the value of women's work and domesticity folded into everything else that she's doing. I think that it's just one line of how she was creating her pieces. But for me, it's pretty unavoidable to notice that there are these household elements that crop up that you don't typically see.
Right. And I'm just noticing now too, as we've talked about it for a while, there is this one is framed. You know, it's the scroll, but there's a very definitive frame it's just within the piece instead of outside the piece.
Right, yeah. And with the fraying around the edges, to me, it also kind of looks like a floor rug or like a placemat or something.
It does, yeah.
Like you could be looking down.
And the title on this piece is Learning to Love Yellow, and she puts in parentheses Matisse interior. So we're not sure if that is a collage from a Matisse work, but even if it's not exactly, it does definitely reference Matisse's style.
I think it's definitely referencing it, and it's really interesting to me that in this piece she references Matisse, and in the other piece there's this really direct reference to Van Gogh. these two really famous canonical male painters, especially Matisse was well known for portraying women. This feels like kind of a funny, tongue-in-cheek way of using his work.
Well, and he also was, he did portray a lot of flowers, a lot of floral imagery,
That's true.
a lot of plants, and also interiors. Both Van Gogh and Matisse made significant interiors. So now we're looking at some landscapes that Laura Barrett made, and she is from Freud, Montana, on the eastern part of the state. And these landscapes reference that area, and they're mixed media works. So as you look closely, to me it looks like there's a little bit of maybe printmaking, maybe some resist work in there, some collage for sure.
Maybe even photo transfers. I think with these, it's really difficult to tell which part of the image came first, especially because she's using so many overlapping colors and allowing the printmaking ink to take on so many different textures. When you see all the little rivulets that almost look like water, and these kind of like crinkles maybe left over from pieces of paper.
It's interesting too, the paper looks really old, and maybe like it was reused, and maybe there's no date on these pieces, so we're not sure if the paper's aged over time since she made it, or if she was making it on repurposed paper. But definitely the shades of yellow and gold and the muted green, the landscape on the eastern side of the state really reference those colors.
I think it's amazing how she was also able to render that type of landscape, not just in the images, like the photographs that she's using, but again in the backgrounds where you see where she applied the ink really heavily and not imagistically, but there's still like these textures that make me think of the ground or the way that the wind whips through that part of the prairie. I think they're really evocative of water and of maybe a harshness in terms of climate. They're all kind of cool toned with these little pops of brighter color that to me just make me think of like very cold, bright winter days.
And I love the way in everyone there are these an isolated tree, an isolated road, an isolated cabin, and you just see all this space around it. Even though these are not that big, she still leaves a lot of space around each object.
Yeah, I think they do feel really big, and there's only one human figure, which I'm not even positive if it's a person. I think I might just be reading it that way because of the scale.
Well, also there's a wish for there to be a person. It's kind of like it's so empty, it's so big, like where are the people? And it doesn't look dead, but it definitely does look harsh and like kind of beaten up.
Yeah. It does look harsh, but not in a critical way. They feel like tributes to me, like really tributes to the vastness of like nature and the plains in the eastern part of Montana. And I also think this one on the right, it looks like the title is Prairie Effigy. So again, it feels like a tribute or kind of an homage to that landscape and the culture in that part of the state.
It's interesting, this image at the bottom, it looks like a flood, or maybe, I don't know, this looks like water to me on the sides.
I wondered
it might not be, but...
Well, I wondered if it was a road or if it was a river.
Yeah.
And it looks like it could be either.
Yeah. Well, and the roads do kind of become rivers in certain weathers, I guess. And then this next piece, an untitled piece, which is on display on the same wall, also references landscape through the texture and the composition. To me, almost more like an aerial view of a landscape with the big rectangle and then the kind of piece going through that might be hair or string that to me seems like a river or, you know, some kind of like crack or gorge in the earth. And the east side is like that. You drive and suddenly there's like a steep like embankment out of nowhere.
I thought aerial view also, or a view from a map. And I think because similar to some of her other pieces that we've talked about, there are these little scraps, little ephemera. There's a little pop top from a soda can right there. I don't know if my view is being informed by knowing that she grew up in Freud and in this part of the state, but there's something to me that almost feels like a homemade map of a place that you could only really know if you were from a certain area or had a really deep familiarity with some plot of land and you were trying to show someone else.
It looks very definitive. It's not a generic landscape. This looks very specific. And I'm just noticing as I get closer that this looks like old linoleum that was maybe pulled off of a floor. And I wonder if this whole backing piece is a piece of floor linoleum from a house.
Yeah.
And there's no date on this one, but the pop top kind of gives it away because what year did they stop putting pop tops on soda cans? I don't know, probably before you were born, Sierra.